Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policies. I am Mahek and I'm the host for today's episode. For today's episode, I have along with me Priyal Lyncia Almeida, who is a research analyst at the Takshashila Institution under the health vertical. Hi Priyal, how are you?
Hi Mahek, I'm doing good. How have you been?
I've been good. I'm actually home. I'm not in Bangalore, so I've been home after a couple of months. So it's nice to be back in the mountains.
Nice. Full pahadi, no? Like, good that you're back home for Diwali.
Yeah, correct. So moving on to today's topic, Priyal, I know you and I have actually spoken about it before, like in a personal space, but I don't think so in any of these episodes, but like in the recent episodes at least, we have actually spoken about manual scavenging, right? So
Right.
when I was about to host the episode for today, I thought there's no better person than Priyal to host the episode for, because I know you feel for them. I know you have read about the policies, and I know you also do have some kind of recommendations to actually help save India's drive to manual scavenging from failing actually. So I want to discuss about in today's episode. I know we won't be focusing a lot on what's been actually done. We'll probably talk about what's failing and what are the key recommendations to probably improve the situation on ground. And we'll also bring in a lot of other socio-economic dynamics to it, right? So before we move ahead, I just want to give a brief overview about what manual scavenging is to our listeners. So basically, manual scavenging is removing untreated human excreta from toilets with bare hands and without safety gear, with most of the manual scavengers being from the Dalit community, which are probably outcasts. Manual scavenging is carried on by the Indian hierarchical caste system. And because of probably social ostracism and a lack of alternatives, this has been forced upon generations of families from lower castes, and they're still continuing this as their daily jobs. And I know it's not often discussed in major news, it's not been shown on television, but the overwhelming fact is 95% of manual scavengers in the country are women, right? And manual scavenging can actually be divided into three different categories, and it's by International Labour Organization. The first is removing human excreta from streets and dry latrines. Second is washing and cleaning of septic tanks, and the third is washing and cleaning of sewers and gutters. So I know that there is a problem. I know there are consequences of it, and there are problems that people don't realize that it still exists. So I think before talking about what can be possibly the most socially responsible and economically driven solution to it, which are also sensitive to the community, because we just can't stop it in a day, let's just discuss about what kind of consequences does this job have on the people who are actually performing it on a daily basis. So Priyal, I would want to ask you, I know you have read about it, to give a brief overview. But we all know there are health consequences of manual scavenging. If you have 2 minutes to define, like, what are the most major health consequences that manual scavengers have to deal with, what will those be?
Right. Because, see, when we talk about manual scavenging, I think the most prevalent consequence of doing that job is health risk, right? Like, it's very evident at this point. Nobody can deny it because it's so out there, right? And the problem is also with the fact that they're not given protective gears. So if you think about it, one of the major problem that comes is the fact that they're constantly exposed to harmful gases such as hydrogen sulfide and methane, and because of this they end up having breathing problems, eye irritation, and they also suffer from like skin problems such as psoriasis, like respiratory diseases, like I said, cardiovascular diseases, also like musculoskeletal disorders. Now, apart from this, they also there are chances that they might end up getting carbon monoxide poisoning, diarrhea, nausea, tuberculosis. All of these are something that a lot of manual scavengers might, like, all of this together might happen, or they might, in some way or the other, they will end up having some of these problems throughout their lives. If you read about manual scavengers, because obviously I'm not an expert in the field, I haven't like gone out there and worked and like understood the ground level problems like a lot of people do, but most of my knowledge about this has purely been out of reading because I wanted to read more about it. And if you read up the data and stuff, you will know that the life expectancy of a manual scavenger is generally between 35 to 40 years of age. So when you think about it, because, and a lot of it is because of also the fact that they end up, while they are working, they are so prone to getting cuts and bruises and all of it, and they don't end up having health insurance or anything to sort of cover them, because of which they end up getting severe infections or something, and they don't seek medical help for it, because out of the little amount of money, they cannot end up losing a day's wage. They're so poorer of the poorest in the society, because of which they end up, the health problems that they end up going through are so severe that even we, I don't think sitting here can sit and imagine about it.
I think you have brought in a very interesting point, Priyal. So we have spoken about how manual scavengers actually are from the most lowest communities according to the Indian
Right,
hierarchical caste system. So, and of course, without any doubt about it, we know these lower caste people will also belong to probably an economically deprived class of society. So they don't have that kind of money to also avail hospital facilities,
right.
right? Even if these health consequences can be treated, and in India we know that the life expectancy has been on an increase because of availability of a lot of better health facilities and
Yeah,
technology. We know at
exactly.
this point that it's not health for all. We are still talking about the same problem, that we have health facilities but the coverage is not for the people who
There.
probably need it the most. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. Like you can construct a lot of primary healthcare centers, but what
Yeah,
if the people who desperately need it are not going to it because they cannot afford to lose even a day's income, because their food, their kids' education, and everything depends on it, right? So
correct.
that's where also a problem lies.
I'll actually come back to the point of daily wage and health and a lot of other factors. But the
Right.
first thing I actually want to talk about is, are we still living? I know, I'll just give you an example. I was doing my master's from a
Hmm.
reputed university just 2 years ago, and I happened,
Right.
since I did my master's in development studies, we did talk about a lot of these things, right? We did talk about
Right.
reservations, we did talk about manual scavenging, we talked about caste and class and in the Indian system. And I remember I happened to be speaking to this one person
Right.
about manual scavengers who had raised a
Hmm.
point in the class that these days even Brahmins are doing manual scavenging work. So my
Right.
question that arises is that, are we really living in a denial? Are we just probably going off because we have that kind of freedom, we have a platform to talk about, and now some days just people find it cool to be talking about these things. They probably feel like, oh, we at least are talking about it. But are
Right.
we actually checking our own facts and talking about the things that are in reality, and we are living in just a stage of denial, and we have this own bubble that we have created, that everything is gone, caste has gone, manual scavengers have gone, the government is doing a
Yeah.
lot of things. Do you think that's the situation currently?
I think we do. I think even at, like you said in the very beginning, right? Mainstream news doesn't talk about it. We
Yeah.
don't talk about it within our own families. Like, it's just not a topic of discussion. Even at any level for that matter, we might have, like, for example, you and I ended up having this conversation one, like, for a few times,
Yeah.
and that's what led to this episode. But in general, a lot of people do not end up having discussions about it, mainly because I don't think they even realize that this is problem, or maybe it's not in their brain space at that point, because everyone's like, they have other issues to deal with, so this doesn't become, that's not their problem to deal with, that becomes sort of like an issue, I guess. But I think when we're talking about living in denial, I think one note I would like to bring up, there is one fact that I would like to bring up, is that in 2021 the administration in itself had stated in the parliament that though there were 941 deaths reported while cleaning the septic and sewer tanks, which is also one of the classifications of manual scavenging, they said there were no deaths directly related to manual scavenging that were documented throughout the country. So even at an administrative level, even at the government level, though they are very aware of it, there is statistics to prove it, nobody is addressing it at the point that we should. And another thing that also I think we need to focus on is the fact that we know this entire Swachh Bharat mission that ended up getting so much of media attention and all of that, right? And maybe rightfully, I'm not the one to judge about it, but it had also come under the fire for allegedly increasing the number of toilets that needs to be manually cleaned, thereby sort of encouraging this practice. And even Indian Railways, for example, a lot of the Indian Railways washrooms, toilets are all, most of them need manual cleaning. So in a way, I mean, the government is also, at least I'm not aware, I know that Indian Railways have had some sort of changes to a certain degree, but otherwise also at the level at which we need to accept that this is a practice that is followed and we need to bring up changes to change this practice, that level of conversation has not been happening. So I think it's fair for me to say that we have been living in denial for a long period of time.
So, like, denial is not only from the larger public, it's basically also coming from the administration. They're, of course,
Right.
associated with their own political gains. They don't want to talk about the deaths that have been reported. And of course, Swachh Bharat has been counted as this gold mission that was successful. And it
Yeah.
was, for a lot of things, it was.
Exactly.
It did create
Yeah.
toilets. But did we talk actually about, at the end of the day, are we really solving the larger issue at hand? And just
Because
living
I
in the
think one more thing, because it's fair to say that okay, you bring up certain things to change the society, right? You, for the betterment of society, but are you, without realizing, creating unintended consequences that are also creating more problems at the ground level for people who are already downtrodden? That is also still living in denial, right? You're not considering them going through an issue in the first place. So I can say that that is also living in a
Yeah.
denial in itself. Because I can be like, okay, fine, yeah, Swachh Bharat mission was done for real and it has done tremendously well for a larger section of the society. But I think somewhere this things also needs to be addressed. So I think, given the fact that we have said that we are living in denial and everything, one of the problems I remember, Mahek, that you mentioned in the very beginning was also that a large section of the manual scavengers are women. Do you
Yeah.
want to like talk more about it and discuss
Yeah.
about this?
Priyal, so first of all, there are hardly any studies, large scale studies done about manual scavengers in the country, which in itself is a problematic scenario.
Right.
But
Yeah.
there have been these organizations, these non-governmental organizations who have been doing research on ground, and there have been other reports which approximately state that 95% of nation's 1.3 million manual scavengers are women. And
Right.
95% is what we know is a huge, enormous, overwhelming number.
Number,
And
yeah.
so we know, okay, well, let's talk about what all is happening. The first of what is happening, it's manual scavenging, which in itself is a problematic job because it has
Yeah, it
health.
is. It is, I think, instead of saying disgrace to the world or to the society, I think using the term disgrace to humanity as a whole is the right way to put it.
Exactly. Like a person's self dignity is at risk, a
Yeah.
person's health is at risk. Now, if we talk about the socioeconomic dynamics and the indicators, we know it's from people from the most vulnerable communities. We know these are
Right.
Dalit communities. We know that these people don't have that kind of money to sustain themselves. And now we're talking about the gender aspect. So we
Right.
know there are women. So let's just talk about how many social indicators are there that are probably making annual scavengers women the most vulnerable at the end of the day, right? And
Right.
when I was reading about it, I was reading about how women are actually probably considering the most number of manual scavengers in the country. I was reading about how most of the time the daughter-in-laws, once they're married, they're expected to take over these jobs of manual scavenging from their mother-in-laws, of cleaning
Right.
cleaning toilets. And sometimes it's not only just cleaning toilets, it's also about picking up and disposing of the dead bodies of animals. That also
Yeah.
these women have to do.
Yeah.
And then, okay, and if it by any chance they refuse to do so, first of all, they can't refuse to do so. I'll tell you why they can't refuse to do so. We just say, okay, let's just get them out of these jobs. We
Yeah.
can't. have that kind of education to probably have an alternative source of income, which they don't. So
Exactly.
when people just say like it's so easy, let's just put them into another source of employment. Can they actually do it? Are they
Yeah.
skilled enough? Do they
Right.
have the basic education also to probably do a job, probably at an Anganwadi? And we also know, since these are also from lower communities, we know at most of the jobs in the areas surrounding them, they won't be accepted. Like,
Exactly.
so many places they will be like, oh, you know that we still live in a society like that where people will not accept a person into their premises because they belong to a certain section of the society, right? So these
Right.
women don't have that kind of opportunity. They don't have
Yeah.
education, they don't have alternative source of employment. And even once in a rare chance, if they decide for their own self dignity that they don't want, or by chance if they're skilled enough that they don't want to continue this, we know that they will be probably shunned from the society and treated with contempt. We know that that's
Exactly.
happened, and they were there
And
are
I think that has also happened, like, this is not an instance I read about a woman, but I read about a man who had his name and all was changed anonymous in a news article, where his family in the village was doing their job was manual scavenging, and then to get out of it, to stop that cycle, he moved to the city, but he never got any job opportunities in the city, so he had to go back to doing the same thing in the city as well. So he's just like, the minute, like, there's no way I can let people know that I come from this community, but like there are no opportunities in itself, so I had to go back to doing what my parents were doing back home. So
yeah, like the options for them are so limited, they're so scarce that at the most of the end of the day, they just feel like, okay, whatever source of income I'm having right now, let me continue with it, right? And
right.
like I was reading this report from it's a decade old report, it's from 2014, and it states and it did survey on approximately 500 women from three
Hmm.
states of, I think, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh. And they,
Right.
at that point in time, they found out that these married women, of course, who are
Hmm.
daughter-in-laws, they receive monthly wages of just rupees 10 to rupees 20, and probably some extra food when there are festivals. Imagine they're
Yeah.
doing this. And Priyal, I'll just put this in the reading section as well.
Hmm.
Like, I really want some people to watch a video on YouTube about women manual scavengers in the country. And you
Right.
should see how people at whose places these women come on a daily basis to clean, how they
Hmm.
talk about women manual scavengers. Like,
Right.
for them, they have no space in the society, and
Right.
that's actually a shame for all. I know we have progressed a lot. I don't want to probably just say we are actually at the place when we were at in 1947. I don't want to say all of these things, but we
Yeah.
actually should be in shame that even after 75 years of independence, we are having probably attempting at a 5 trillion economy.
Yeah.
We are doing well on so many indicators, both socio-economic. We have to actually accept that there is still a large section of society for whom this kind of world does not exist.
Yeah.
They're
And
there.
also I think, from what you said, right, like accepting that there is a problem doesn't mean we are dismissing all the developments that have taken over the past 75 years of our independence, but also accepting it allows us to find out tools to, overcome this problem in a way that also pushes us further into development. I think that's what is
Yeah,
more important.
correct.
And yeah.
So, like, we'll talk about development and sustainable development goals. But before that, we'll just take a quick break and we'll talk
Yeah.
about it after we are back.
Cool.
Listeners,
Yeah.
I'll see you after the break. Hello and welcome back to the episode. So, before taking the break, we were talking about the state of manual scavengers in the country and how we were talking about how India has its own trajectory of development, and we have a developed state of development goals to achieve in the next decade. So, Priyal, do you want to talk about sustainable development, keeping these manual scavengers in mind?
Yeah, actually, so I know that we have like 17 goals, I think, if I'm not wrong, to achieve by 2030
Yeah.
for sustainable development goals. We have around 17 goals for it. And this practice, right, the practice of manual scavenging is sort of preventing India in meeting its goals. And I'll tell you why. There are basically 4 goals that we are sort of, which will be affected, which we won't be able to achieve if we do not learn how to abolish or sort of get away from this manual scavenging issue. One is the goal 8, that is of decent work and economic growth, because, obviously manual scavengers do not have safety gear and equipment, not even minimum pay or any employment benefit, not even like health coverage, none of that. Next is also the goal 6, which is of clean water and sanitation, which is quite obvious, right, when we are talking about
Yeah.
manual scavenging and the environment that they work in and everything. Then also, in addition to these, the practice also runs against the goal 10 of reduced inequality and goal 16 of peace, justice, and strong institutions, as well as like the goal of gender equality. So all of these goals will not be able to achieve if we do not end up like sort of intervening into this manual scavenging problem and find a solution to it.
You actually have highlighted a very good point that we have these set targets to achieve by like by
Right.
2030. We have zero hunger target, we have the target of zero poverty, and of course others, of course achieving gender equality and all of that. But like we still are in the stage of practicing it, and
Yeah,
without actually working on the root causes of so many problems here, we will never be able to achieve the development goals that we have marked for 2030.
exactly. And also, Mehak, like it's not like government has not done anything. No, there are programs and there are sort of policies in place by the government, but for some reason they are failing,
Yeah, yeah.
So I
That's
think,
a very important point. Like, yeah, I know we haven't spoken about it by now, but we know it's actually banned. We know the government has, on various levels and
yeah,
across different political parties, they have tried to probably do something about the situation. For example, Delhi
yeah,
government is doing a lot for manual scavengers
right,
in their region, and on a center, on a state level, they have done a lot of things. But there
right,
are reasons why there are a lot of popular programs and policies are failing, and we are not talking about it. And
right,
just cut me wherever you feel like you want to add something or not.
yeah,
According to me, why policies and programs are also failing is that all of us till now have failed to take into account the social determinants of the job.
definitely, yeah.
Do you actually remember women even being shown on television doing manual scavenging?
No,
Priyal,
they
you and I.
whenever you see an I remember seeing an advertisement in television once where the child, it was like a child saying that my father does a very important work and without him the society wouldn't survive and all of it. And towards the end, he actually shows that his father is a manual scavenger. And for the
Yeah.
longest period of time, I believe the high percentage of manual scavengers were men, until I read the reports that said that 95%, which is a gigantic percentage, if you
Yeah.
think about it, right? That a gigantic percentage of it is actually women and not men. And
And I feel ashamed that until 2019, I didn't know this.
yeah,
Like,
same. I had
I
no idea
yeah,
until 2020, until like I watched that advertisement and I was like, why is it still in practice and what?
yeah,
And I know that government has put policies in place, that there have been policies to
yeah.
that punishes people who involve or who, put contract these manual scavengers and everything. There is like legal punishment and all there, but even then it's sort of not working.
Since we fail to recognize who's actually doing the job,
Yeah,
we are actually targeting the wrong population. 5%.
exactly.
I'm not saying that 5% of men who do manual scavenging, we shouldn't do anything for them. We should.
Yeah, I mean, we have to do collectively, but we
Yeah.
also need to understand like various aspects of the problem to come up with solutions. We can't just work on the broad umbrella of, okay, manual scavenging is a problem. You need to understand there are multiple factors involved in sort of understanding this problem and also coming up with better policies.
Yeah, we have to understand why these women are getting into jobs. How did women
Yeah,
actually end up being in these jobs, and what is that it's preventing from getting out of it? So until and
Exactly,
unless
because
we're targeting the wrong
also
population, we won't be able to find the solutions to it.
exactly. And also, I think we know that caste and everything plays a huge role into this,
Yeah.
right? So, if you're going to work for women and men collectively as manual scavenging thing, you need to understand how important caste plays in this particular
Yeah.
equation, and how can you sort of bypass this and sort of work around this problem. So, I think all of this definitely needs to be considered, which I think we have failed in considering.
Exactly. And I also think that, first of all, implementation is a huge problem.
Yeah,
Like, we know health is a state subject,
yeah,
right? So even if an XYZ state fails to implement or fails to provide the health benefits or fails to
right.
understand the health consequences, fails to implement the policies in place, the union government
Right.
has very little to do in it. First of all,
Yeah.
they're in denial of it. And
Yeah.
even if by chance they feel, okay, let's just do something about it, can they really do anything about it? So
Exactly. Yeah.
there is no proper execution of laws in the place. There are no proper plans to regulate that if the policies are in
Yeah.
place. I think that's where the problem is also. Like, I don't know if you remember this, there have been so many news instances about a manual scavenger being beaten up. There have been
Yeah.
so many news instances about how they are denied basic food, basic rights,
Yeah.
right, which is equal for all of us.
And like, think about it, yeah. 10-20 rupees per month.
And police harassment, we know all of these things.
Yeah.
We know all of this is a problem, but the execution is fading. What There
Yeah.
is no point of having all of these laws and policies and schemes and programs into place until and unless they're not properly implemented, right? We can't just
Exactly.
completely blame the general public, or they are not understanding. They are
Yeah.
also not understanding is a problem, but do
Yeah.
we have enough laws being implemented in a proper way for them?
Exactly.
We
and
feel
also
it.
and also there has been laws, right, like the Employment of Manual Scavengers and Construction of Dry
Yeah,
Latrines Prohibition Act, which was implemented in 1993, and also the Prohibition of the Employment as Manual Scavengers and their Rehabilitation Act, which was passed in 2013. We know that these policies have been in place and they have been put in a place to eliminate the practice of manual scavenging, but clearly implementation has been a big massive issue. And
correct.
unless you sort of figure out a way about implementing this in the right way, like, there is no strict regulations when it comes to punishing the offenders, and like the oppression, because of which the oppression has continued. Like, people, I mean, if there is no way of punishing the offenders, what is the fear in the people from preventing them from using this practice?
I think we somehow the justice system has also failed to understand that they also, the manual scavengers at the end of the day, are important beneficiaries of all these programs, and we're not
Right.
taking into account, and that's why we are failing. I also think that
Yeah.
there are, see, I don't know if I'm completely right on this, but I also feel like, for example, an XYZ person is a manual scavenger, and the government has planned up a program, and there have been schemes like that
Yeah.
where the children are provided with food,
Hmm.
are provided by midday meals. Such kind of programs and schemes somehow prevent that manual scavenger from getting out of the profession, because they
Yeah.
know at the end of the day the family is being fed or their education is taken care of. So all of these things have a huge dynamic and have a huge role to play, and we are failing to understand where the problem is lying. Of course, there is non-enforcement of law. There is of course lack of awareness in society. That's another
Yeah.
problem, that why policies and programs are failing. I think at the end of the day, there are problems with, are we incentivizing them for the wrong thing? Are we
Right.
incentivizing them for staying in the job at the end of the day?
Right.
Like, if like a person who cannot meet his day end, who cannot meet his day needs, will, of course, if the
Yeah.
child is being fed, they will probably choose to stay in the job. Also
Yeah.
because they're not skilled in anything else, they don't have that kind of education, so they will probably want to stay in that job. So I think all of these are counterproductive.
And also, I think one of the important points you brought up is, I think one of the recommendations of sorts we can also give is the fact that you need to sort of create awareness in the general public in itself, right? Because, for example, people, they know that manual scavenging is bad, but they don't understand the implications of it. And there are a lot of ways you can spread awareness. I remember when you had to spread awareness about the polio do boon zindagi ki campaign
Yeah.
and everything, it was constantly there in the television. Every time an ad happened, whether it was after between a cricket match, whether it was in between like a TV serial break, or whether it was in between the break of like a television reality show, it was constantly played. You need to sort of drill it inside. Even that happened with TB as well.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of the dots program and etc. I got to know because of these advertisements.
Yeah.
So if you constantly sort, because you have advertisements about how smoking kills and how smoking is bad and everything, I think you also need to have a lot of advertisements about why you should not practice like you should not commission or sort of involve in manual scavenging. And obviously now if people are not going to employ them in this, you need to find alternative employment opportunities for these guys, so to sort of
Yeah.
so that they can come back into society in a different occupation, bring up
Yeah.
their skill set or something. That is probably one of the ways we can go about it.
Correct. And I think a problem which is so socially rooted cannot have a simple political solution to it.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
It has to involve dynamics, of course, from political angle, from social angle, from economical angle, and from technological angle as well, because we know that we have those kind of technologically
Yeah,
app-driven solutions. Tanks and all are being cleaned everywhere, Priyal. It's not like
exactly.
only
Yeah.
happening in the country, right?
I know.
But
And it's like, see, manual scavenging has been happening all over the world. I'm not saying it's a India specific problem, but the scale with which it's happening in India is sort of something that we need to talk about.
scale, I also think like we have no health gears. We don't have
Yeah,
safety equipment for them to be given. They don't
exactly.
get health benefits. They're not provided with security. For they're not even paid well at the end of it.
Yeah,
They're sometimes not even paid actually.
yeah,
Like we leave the aspect to the corner. They're not
yeah,
even paid a lot of times
yeah,
because it's just considered their job. And
exactly.
I think we need such solutions which involve all of those dynamics and then probably consider moving ahead with it.
Yeah. I think one another thing that we sort of need to point out is also the fact that the government also has sort of committed to constructing restrooms utilizing the twin pit technology as part of like the Swachh Bharat initiative, which is a good step because it would eliminate a person's direct contact with human waste. But the thing is, only 15% of the total toilets built were using this technology. So I think if we scale up this, and from now on if every single public toilet that is built under this mission is done using this technology in itself, then I think it's a clear signal to people as well, right, that government is obviously doing it in this direction. It also motivates people to sort of go in that direction as well, which is, I think, something that the government also needs
Yeah.
to consider.
And I also think like the first and the most important thing that we have to do is just to get people out of this job
Yeah,
is to educate them and to probably skill them for other
yeah,
alternative sources of income. So if
definitely.
I don't have anything else to work upon, I will still continue with this kind of job, right? So
Yeah,
like I know that a lot of governments across the regions have been trying to probably provide that kind of education so that the future generations are not involved into the practice. But we still think that skill enhancement, one-time capital assistance for a lot of people to probably start with their own self-employment projects, capital funding, all of this is required at the moment. I
yeah,
know it's going to be very cost, but to probably prevent, we're talking about like more than 1 million people, and
yeah,
out of
yeah,
which 95% of them are women. So we know that we're talking
exactly.
about a population which is so vulnerable that they can't do anything about themselves, and that's why the government and the administration has to step in to
Yeah,
probably put them in a position where they can actually drive themselves towards a better state of living. But they won't be able to until we bootstrap them actually, until
yeah,
we give them that kind of assurance, we give them those kind of skill set to probably move ahead in their lives. Otherwise,
yeah,
generations will come, we'll still be talking
exactly.
about manual scavenging. And
Yeah,
I also think the administration needs to accept that there is a problem. Until and unless we accept the problem is there, we won't find solutions to it. Like how we this is living in a denial, like climate change is not happening, COVID's not happening, people
yeah,
are not dying. Everything is work. Everything is
Like
nice.
denial looks nice and all in the beginning, but when like at certain point, all of us need to accept that, listen, this is a genuine problem. And I think it's important for everyone to get it inside their mind that simply because we are saying that there is a problem in one area doesn't mean that we are dismissing all the developments and good things that, that have happened, accepting that, like, it's important to see it in that direction as well. That, like you say about a lot of, like, even mental health, we say, no, accepting to yourself is the first step in sort of solving the problem. I think that's what even you need to do, even in terms of like a lot of these issues as well. Accepting that it is a problem is important.
Yeah, because otherwise, for half of the people, I think more than half, for 74% of the population, we are just living in a utopian world and everything is perfect. And
Yeah.
it's actually a shame because we have technological solutions to it. We are not only saying
Exactly.
go have a technological solution, just provide them with capital funding, do this. We have technologies to probably
Yeah.
shift the people to a better state of the jobs. And I was reading about how cesspit waste can be converted through certain processes into useful manure for farming. And
Yeah.
in some places or in some parts of India, trucks are equipped with those pumping devices that can clean up to 7 cesspits per a day, and which can be used for farming in future. But
Right.
appropriately used, I know a lot of people have pointed out towards how this can also lead to a result of dumping of untreated sewage into aquatic bodies like rivers and all. But if we have regulations over that, and if we use the technology appropriately, I think we'll be able to step away from the problem and probably look at the solution with a more wide spec or from a very different wide perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think I completely agree with whatever you said. And like I keep reiterating again and again, accepting the problem is
The first step.
like starts of the first step to finding the solutions. I think that's what.
We have just so normalized the aspects of purity and pollution in our hierarchical system that we fail to understand the problem actually exists. It shouldn't be normalized.
Yeah.
But I hope that we do come up with solutions and we do implement them in a more practical way so that people's lives can be bettered, and especially
Exactly.
the more people at risk. And thank you, Priyal, for joining me for today's episode. It was really nice speaking to you about it. And I hope we do
My
continue
pleasure.
Thank you. And I hope we do continue such discussions in the future.
Yeah. I think every one of our discussion has been surrounding some or the other social issues. So yeah, this was fun.
It's nice to talk about these. It's actually not nice. I think it's important to talk about.
Yeah, it's very important to talk about these things because the more conversations you have around it, the more, you are prone to changing people's perspectives about it. So
correct. And thank you to all the listeners for tuning into another episode for All Things Policy. Keep listening to ATP and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye-bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.